After less than a month in office, Donald Trump's national security advisor quits. What does it say about decision-making in the White House? And what does it mean for how the world approaches a superpower? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Before Michael Flynn resigned on Monday, 348 days was the record for the shortest tenure as National Security Advisor. Flynn, however, has lasted only 24 days. Now, he stepped down because of a scandal involving the Russian ambassador. Critics say it's yet another sign President Donald Trump's administration is falling apart. Is Flynn's resignation an isolated incident then, or part of a larger trend? We'll get to our guests in just a moment, but first, Alan Fisher takes a closer look at Michael Flynn's short time as National Security Advisor.
As a direct presidential appointment, General Mike Flynn didn't need Senate confirmation to be the National Security Advisor. His spell in the White House was short and troubled.
It reflects very poorly on Trump's ability to pick advisors the right way.
An early supporter of the new president, he delighted campaign crowds with his attacks on rival Hillary Clinton. But it was his post-election connections with Russia that put him in the spotlight. In his last few days in office, President Obama imposed new sanctions on the Russians for their interference in the US presidential election. He also expelled 35 diplomats. That General Flynn spoke with the Russian ambassador to the US in the days after that was not in any doubt. What was called into question was what was discussed. He initially denied talking sanctions, a story the vice president was happy to repeat.
They did not discuss anything having to do with the United States' decision to expel diplomats or impose a censure against Russia.
But US officials with access to intercepted communications confirmed Flynn had discussed sanctions, and that meant he possibly broke the law. Confronted with the new evidence, Flynn didn't deny it. For days, senior White House officials would not say if Flynn was safe.
It's not for me to answer hypotheticals. It wouldn't be responsible. It's a sensitive matter. General Flynn has served his country admirably.
And so now he leaves, the first high-profile casualty from the Trump White House.
I think it's very likely that if Flynn was more upfront about this conversation initially, it would have blown over. It would have been kind of caught amidst all the other countless scandals that have happened in the first 3 weeks of the Trump administration.
Now there is a key question. Was Flynn acting on his own, or did he clear the discussions with his boss? If Flynn was acting on Trump's orders, this relatively small scandal will get significantly larger. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, Trump's opponents say his administration is chaotic and inefficient. Press Secretary Sean Spicer has a turbulent relationship with journalists he deals with every day. Ambassadorships, sub-cabinet positions, even key posts such as the White House Communications Director remain vacant. The administration doesn't know who leaked transcripts of Trump's phone calls with other presidents and prime ministers, and several members of the government, including President Trump himself, are accused of lying to the public. Well, let's bring our guests into the show. We've got plenty to chat about. In Newcastle, we have Randall J Stephens, an Associate Professor of History and American Studies at Northumbria University. And in Singapore, Resnick, US foreign policy and security expert, joining us via Skype. Good to have you with us. If I could start with Ivan, what do you think this resignation says about just how efficiently the White House is functioning right now?
I think that the resignation of Mike Flynn sends the indisputable signal that this White House is functioning completely inefficiently and incompetently at this point. And so I think that this gives U.S. adversaries great reassurance tonight that they are dealing with an administration that is relatively inept at this stage.
Is this a bit of a surprise, Randall? I mean, Trump campaigned on a promise to run the country like he runs a company. Is it looking like more like Apple or Enron at this point?
Probably a little bit more like Enron. I mean, we have to remember, too, that he with his businesses filed for bankruptcy multiple times. And I think that a lot of conservatives in America don't see a real difference between how a good business could run and how a country could be run. But it does speak volumes, I think, about the chaos in the current administration, the troubles that they're having between different factions within the Trump White House. And it looks like this maybe is just the beginning of other falls to come.
Well, since you mentioned there that there are different factions, perhaps a good point to remind ourselves of what the National Security Advisor is supposed to do, and he's supposed to help coordinate and dictate foreign policy even. Henry Kissinger served from 1969 to 1975. He helped diffuse tensions with the Soviet Union back then, even framed the US strategy during the Vietnam War. Brent Scowcroft had the job twice, once under Gerald Ford and later under George H.W. Bush. He advised US and foreign business leaders on joint ventures, strategic planning and risk assessment. Zbigniew Brzezinski advised Jimmy Carter when he was president. Now, he was the architect of the current-day relations with China. Condoleezza Rice, will remember, was the first female national security advisor, worked under George W. Bush. She created a stabilization group to rebuild Iraq. Susan Rice was the last national security advisor to work with Barack Obama, and she worked to curb the Ebola crisis in West Africa and help negotiate the Iran nuclear deal. Ivan, when you look at the track record, it does seem like there's a pretty decent track record of the national security advisor at least coordinating policy. Why does it seem like coordination is not working? That seems to be the one thing that perhaps the National Security Advisor post has failed to do so far.
Well, it bears recalling that the U.S. president wants a national security advisor that is effectual and is strong enough to control all the what usually tend to be very big personalities on the National Security Council: Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. But at times, the National Security Advisor has overshadowed the policymaking process. So when you referred to Kissinger and Brzezinski, those were two national security advisors that quite infamously tried to marginalize some of the senior foreign policy advisors to their respective presidents, like the Secretary of State and Defense. So you want an NSA that is strong, but perhaps not too strong as to crowd out other dissenting opinions. Condoleezza Rice was also criticized for not being strong enough in dealing with big personalities like Colin Powell and Don Rumsfeld during the first Bush term in office. I think Flynn's problem was that he was probably widely seen, even within the administration, among people like Secretary of Defense Mattis and Secretary of State Tillerson, as being kind of a lightweight. Mattis, of course, is a 4-star general, and Flynn was a 3-star general. So already there was going to be some issues of
But hang on,
even.
This is a person who is credited with coming with an agenda, is how some people described him. He definitely had a clear opinion on some issues. He called Islam, not Islamic radicalism, he called Islam as a religion. I can't say we were told that he played a key role on the immigration ban, the executive order, apparently in contacts with Russia. I mean, when you say he's weak, what happened?
That's right. I think in part the lack of respect that seemed to accrue to him was a function of some of these weird beliefs he's had. His rather obsequious behavior towards the Putin regime, his extreme Islamophobia. I think all of these things really militated against him being taken all that seriously by other foreign policy heavyweights in the administration.
Randall, how much influence do we know how much influence he actually had on Donald Trump and policy in general?
Well, it seems like there's sort of a mutual influence here, because it definitely is the case that Flynn's ideology mirrors much of Trump's ideology, and to a certain extent, Steve Bannon, a key advisor as well. So it seems like there was this a willingness on Flynn's part to cozy up with the Russians, and also to express these views about Islam that were far right. Actually, in this last summer, Flynn had been retweeting some alt-right white nationalist tweets about Islam and saying, things like it's rational to fear Islam, and talking about sort of a clash of cultures and a clash of worldviews. So it does seem to match Donald Trump's pretty bleak, dark, dystopian view of how the world operates at the moment.
I guess my question, Randall, still is, though, how did that lead to a breakdown in communication, a failure to even communicate, we're told apparently, with other branches of the US government to tell them, explain to them, for example, what was coming when it comes to the immigration ban executive order or the US position on UN appointees, which we've seen kind of go into meltdown mode? I mean, it's one thing to have a strong opinion and an ideology, but how does that lead to a lack of communication?
There should have been forewarnings about this, because remember, it was the Obama administration that fired Flynn as a defense advisor in 2014. And Flynn said that was because Flynn had been pretty hawkish about security and about the state of America. He said America was not as safe in 2014 as it had been a few years before. And then the Obama administration responded and said actually he was fired because of his inability to work with others and because he had a kind of brash, elbows out sort of style of management that was that didn't endear him to his colleagues and to those who worked with him.
All right.
So I think there should have been clear signs of how it would be to work with him.
All right, if the man with elbows out and ideology is out now, Ivan, where does that leave US policy and some of these international issues? I mean, he was the one who put Iran on notice. He was reported to have a favorable, shall we say, view at the very least of Russia. Is US policy towards some of these issues likely to change at all?
Yeah, I think that what's possible here is that Flynn's removal weakens the extreme sort of a Trump-Bannon faction in the White House, and you see a growing influence of these more establishment-type foreign policymakers like Tillerson at State and Mattis at Defense, and thereby the ship maybe gets righted a little bit.
The National Security Advisor is the President's chief authority on all national security issues. He or she is directly appointed by the President. Trump's already chosen Flynn's temporary replacement. Keith Kellogg is an Army veteran who fought in Vietnam. He rose to the rank of 3-star general and worked for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. After leaving the Army in 2003, Kellogg worked for several defense companies. The 72-year-old has advised Trump on foreign policy issues for the past 11 months. Let me take the question back to Ivan, because you were talking about this, how it should perhaps dilute that alliance of, or that thinking of Trump and Stephen Bannon. What do we know about Kellogg, though?
We don't know very much. He's relatively well respected in the Pentagon, and he does not have anything near the toxic reputation that someone like Mike Flynn had. So apparently he's just going to be a caretaker until a more permanent NSA is appointed by President Trump. So one would imagine that this sort of lends, that Kellogg's appointment lends some stability to the foreign policy making process, to the interagency process at the White House when it comes to making foreign policy. But at this point, all bets are off. This administration has already run well off the rails in just 3 weeks. So one hopes that things would be somewhat more stable after Flynn's departure, but who knows?
Well, who knows is a good comment, I guess. Randall, maybe you know, because, I mean, when you look at the picture, if ultimately policy can be made or changed at the last minute by a tweet from the president himself, we've seen that in some of the issues. 180s have been done through tweets on relations with Australia and so on. Can anyone really make the functioning of this administration a little bit smoother, however much he's elbows in?
That's hard to say. I mean, it is strange, this position we're in now of building policy and shifting on policy through social media, through Twitter. And so you have, people in the intelligence community and in his administration who are scrambling sometimes because a tweet will come out that seems to go against something he had just said on the campaign trail or a promise that he's made. So it does seem like it's it will continue to be difficult as long as it continues to operate in this fashion, which is chaotic.
Even you're in Singapore. I mean, how confused do you think the world is right now about how to approach this administration, how to approach the US, given what we've been discussing?
Frankly, the only recipe that seems to work, and I think Prime Minister Abe of Japan followed it quite closely this past weekend, was really this is a narcissistic president whose whose personality hinges on receiving esteem from others. And so to the extent that you are really slathering on the respect and the deference, this president seems to be highly receptive to those sorts of entreaties. The problem is that everyone sees that this is his MO, and I think it won't be long before other heads of state start taking advantage of this sort of this psychological or personality-related weakness of Trump's. He's such an extreme narcissist that if you are basically kissing his behind, he will respond favorably, irrespective of whatever he said previously.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a moment and take the question to Randall. What do you make of the suggestion those who support Trump say, you know, this administration hasn't been any more chaotic, hasn't had any more hiccups than other administrations have had. It's simply a matter of how his administration is being covered and presented by the media, because they've got it in for him. There is bad blood now between this presidency and the media, and they're the ones who are giving a skewed image of him. What do you make of that?
I think in a way, Trump learned so much from a mentor of his, Roy Cohn, who taught him that he was a lawyer. He actually was an aide to Senator Joseph McCarthy during the Red Scare. And he taught Trump that when someone attacks you or has it out for you, that you fight back just as hard as they hit you. So, I mean, lately Trump has been tweeting and talking about fake news and the fake news media, which is a classic Roy Cohn tactic. Take what your enemies say about you and turn it around and say the same thing about them, regardless, in this case, of whether it's true or not, which it's, you know, almost uniformly untrue. But it seems like that's sort of his MO.
Do you think this is one description which has been applied to how this administration is operating? One person described it as a campaign administration, where anyone who wants anything kind of shows up and hangs out for the maximum amount of time it can in the White House to try and figure out an alternative sort of channel of influence. And I'm wondering, Randall, given what we've said about how this administration is perhaps conducting its affairs in a little less traditional manner through tweets and through other channels, do you think that there will be this sort of back channels developing where foreign governments try to look for influence in untraditional ways, whereas before people knew, for example, during the Bush administration, you go to Condi Rice if you want to get influence?
Yes, I think that this is definitely the case. I mean, we see this plenty already within his own administration. You know, and also on the campaign, we knew that Kellyanne Conway was saying things on cable news in America on television to try to reach Trump because, you know, Kellyanne was sort of pitted against Bannon in some of these battles for the soul of the Trump campaign. So it does seem like there's this kind of competition in a weird, a very strange way. It does look like reality TV president. It has some parallels to The Apprentice of a kind of competitive factor. And it also jibes with the way that Trump thinks about diplomacy and policy of, you know, the United States not getting taken advantage of financially and always coming out on top, and that around the world there are basically winners and losers. So I think that you're right. It probably wouldn't be too much longer before foreign governments understand that kind of playbook and learn how best to insert themselves into the kind of Trumpian narrative.
Even all administrations have had differences within its ranks. Is any of this unprecedented to have what we're calling perhaps a campaign administration? Does it actually take it to a new and different level?
Sure, all administrations have factional rivalries. If you go back to the Bush administration, the sort of neocons versus the more pragmatic types like Colin Powell. If you go back to the Reagan administration, Cap Weinberger at defense versus Schultz at state, you always have factionalism. The problem with this administration is that it's staffed by, for the most part, rank amateurs who have no idea what they're doing, including the president himself, who has absolutely no political experience whatsoever. So that we really are an amateur hour here. And Trump, I think he liked being on the campaign. I don't think he likes public policy all that much. It's not as much fun. And his presidency seems to be a permanent campaign, in part because he doesn't really have any coherent public policy views of note. So it's hard to kind of get things done when no one really knows what the president himself actually wants to accomplish.
Do you think, Randall, there was a bit of testing going on of the president already by some countries? We saw that incident in which, while Trump was meeting with the Japanese prime minister, the Japanese leader, that North Korea decided to go ahead and launch that missile. Do you think that was a bit of testing to see which approach works or doesn't work with President Trump?
Yeah. There was some commentary in the media about that. There's some experts who think actually that the launch could also have to do with internal politics within North Korea. But it clearly sent a signal when Shinzo Abe is in Florida with Donald Trump. The curious thing about that as well, I mean, speaking of amateurism, Abe and Trump were at dinner when they received news about this and were briefed on these highly classified, what seemed probably to be highly classified materials, or at least materials that were sensitive, while they were at dinner. They didn't go to a secret location or a private location or a secure location, but they were being briefed right there. And there were people who were actually sitting there in the dinner party where some of them were taking photos of this, taking videos. And I mean, it just showed that the Trump administration has a really steep learning curve, I think, about maintaining the security of the United States when it comes to these issues and doing things right.
Talking about a learning curve, even Flynn is now civilian, we shouldn't forget. He can be investigated even easier right now, correct? And this may only be the beginning of what we learn about other things that are going on within the administration.
Yeah, we don't want to be too presumptuous, but at this point, it's really hard to believe that Flynn was acting entirely on his own as some maverick in dealing with the Russian ambassador to the United States. I think that given not only the closeness of his past relationship with Donald Trump during the campaign, but also with Trump's own views pertaining to Putin, which are so otherwise incomprehensible. He's just been constantly effusive in praise for it. It's the one issue he's been consistent on over the course of his campaign and early presidency. So this really smells quite terrible. And I have a feeling that Flynn is just going to be the first domino to fall.
All right, we've got about 30 seconds left, and Randall wanted to make a comment there. So let me give it to Randall in 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, just briefly, I was going to say that it could be that Flynn has run afoul of what's called the Logan Act, which dates back to 1799. And that was just an act that said that those who were not working for the executive branch or through the executive office couldn't conduct diplomacy on their own. And there's only been one person indicted on that, but there have been people accused of it in the past, like when Jane Fonda went to Vietnam, or when Senator George McGovern went to Cuba in 1975. So it'll be interesting if there's any traction on something like that.
Time will tell, I guess. Let's thank our guests for now, because we are out of time. Randall J Stephens and even Resnick. And thank you for watching too. You can see the show again anytime by visiting our website. aljazeera.com is the address. And if you want further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here for now, thanks for watching.